SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. I'm your host, Todd Kirk, and I'm joined by a replacement for Casey Trujillo. And if y'all like Casey, I'm sorry, he's not here today. He is on a plane. So I asked my good friend, Debra Wilson, to come and be my co-host today. Debra's actually been a guest on the show in the past. She's our VP of marketing here at Brainstorm, and she's awesome. So Debra, I'm so glad you're here with us today.
I'm so excited to be here. I could never replace Casey, truly, but I'll do my best. I'll try not to get into character too much, but I'll do my best.
You mean try to pretend like you're Casey?
Yeah,
that
right,
means you have to do a lot of eye rubbing, and you have to like laugh awkwardly at weird times, and you got to say all the time.
Yes,
Like really,
exactly.
really
Yeah, lots of dramatic pauses.
Yeah, make sure you got all that.
I'll be ready. Yeah.
Good. Well, we are joined today by an awesome guest. We're on with Joe Di Grande, who I'm super pumped to have on. Joe and I actually connected originally through the Customer Success Collective. Joe he's a former VP of Customer Success, and today he runs his own business focused on helping companies deal with digital touch and scaling their business. So super pumped to have you on, Joe. And maybe if you could, maybe want to give any more background and context to who you are for our audience today.
Yeah, no, happy to. And thanks for having me, Todd, and Debra, great to be you as well. To give you background on me, I've been about 10 years in account management, customer success, and also revenue operations, including CS. And I've been at many companies, from tech companies, from eMarketer, Saros, Business Insider at my last, before I, left and went and start my own consultancy at Joe Does Tech Touch. Yeah, we focus on helping companies, launch their digital customer success or tech touch motion from start to finish.
Now, I'm curious, one of the things that I run into a lot of the times is that a lot of organizations may have invested heavily in implementation managers or client success managers or account managers, and a lot of their effort is being driven through a human touch first.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people also don't necessarily like the term tech touch. It's like the word moist, they're like, like feels a little weird. But tech touch is a really important concept because unfortunately you can't always scale, especially if you're selling to lots of different audiences. I 100%. Guess help us understand kind of why tech touch, why focus your consultancy and your efforts on that? What do you think is maybe something important for people to know if they have historically done all of their customer support through human-led interaction?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, happy to also give like context to the name because I know it's a little bit, not the typical, like blending in my own personal name as well as a term. But to kind of take a step back, I had actually at the time at my, first point of where I was launching, such an initiative, it was actually at eMarketer. And I was given the task. I was always scrappy. Was always the guy doing side hustles for the most part. So I myself was looking at a way to scale my own book of accounts, like in terms of how I manage them. And at that time I was using tools, you figure it was Salesloft, Salesforce, whatever I had in my tech stack to figure out a scrappy way of managing them. And then at that point, I started to automate my touch points. And then eventually we started to, change our business model, as a business eMarketer to focus on smaller businesses, which is typically the long tail, which is where that tech touch term came from, to focusing on the long tail customers at scale. And it was wildly successful. I mean, it started with a test segment of 62 accounts, blowing up to about 700 by the time I left. But why is it important? In that particular example, we lowered our price point to, attract a larger audience, which was great. But it wouldn't have been scalable for the business to manage that many customers. The typical, I know based on that book where it blew up to about 700 companies for that type of business, it would have essentially, with traditional methods, maybe be about 8 to 10 account managers or customer success managers, which obviously for a business, if they were lower ARR, it's not as scalable, costs too much, right? So that's where it becomes a challenge. In terms of where it's going now and the shift between tech touch, I know tech touch is definitely, the word has transitioned. Previously it was defined as also a strategy as well as a segment, for long tail customers, lower ARR, and unfortunately it's gotten a bad rep in terms of being like where, oh, just throw them into tech touch, just into that segment. But in reality, it's, in my opinion, it's actually changed to more so that strategy. And now it's transitioned to the word digital customer success, digital touch, or one to many. But it is extremely important. I mean, at the end of the day, especially now with AI, a lot of companies are looking at, how not only automation, but generative AI, artificial intelligence bots, how can they manage their customers at scale, keeping the experience consistent, but also allowing them to do more with less and take on more. And it's super, super crucial, especially, with what's going on in the economy at the end of the day. I mean, it's just the reality we face.
I'm just processing. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about this for a minute. Joe, one of the things that's really interesting for me, at least, is that concept. I really like what you're saying there, because a lot of times when I hear about this idea of digital touch, or it has viewed as like, well, those are the customers that aren't paying us very much, so
Right.
we're going to put them in that because we don't want to waste time on low value business. But
Sure.
what you're saying is that there's a shift to have that be a strategy, and that's a strategy that could be used across all of your segments, including even your biggest and your most important customers.
Yes.
For a company who's trying to figure out how to make that mental shift from a segment to a strategy, what would you recommend to start thinking about if you're trying to say, it's not just about trying to save time with low value customers, it's also about trying to create better experiences for all of your customers? How would you position that or help somebody think through that process?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I actually wrote a post about this probably about a week or two ago on, how to kind of think about, making this step and taking a step forward as far as doing a tech touch or digital CS strategy. And I would say starting, ironically, with your long tail customers, if you have them, right? As far as having them being low risk in terms of dollar value, it's probably your best bet in terms of experimenting, right? And
you
experimenting,
can learn what works and find that out at low risk, and then apply that broadly when you figure it out.
100%. And that's kind of what we've done. I've done in a number of companies. It's like, okay, we focus on that lower ARR segment of customers that are at scale, even at an individual user level, right? So maybe you're not, contacting the decision maker, you're contacting the end users. You still have to experiment to see what works. Once you figure out your stride, that's when you could start to expand it. Okay, let me focus on my higher touch customers. And you're not going to fully automate. I think I want to make that very clear, right? A lot of it can be automation. It's where like tech touch came from, where, there's this just automated element where the human's taken out of it, or it looks like it's coming from a human. But tech touch and digital customer success, it's just at the end of the day, leveraging technology to scale. So this could be anywhere where something's being served to a customer success manager in a CRM or a customer success platform, just to make them more efficient, right? It's those internal triggers in the back end that's kind of telling them what to do, what actions to take, and maybe not be customer facing, right? Maybe it's just queuing up communications for them to send to the actual end user or the customer. So I think that's also something to kind of help people think about, the shift. If there is a little bit of hesitation to launch a digital motion, that it doesn't necessarily have to go to the customer. It could actually just be helping the actual rep itself to have a better use of their time when managing their customers.
I'm curious to know, so I'm coming at this from a marketing perspective, as you think about, of course, the value of automation or scalability is exponential when you can truly make that feel very personalized, very targeted, very segmented.
Yes.
But I have to think that any one team's or company's ability to offer that level of customization, of personalization, is going to need good data infrastructure, right?
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit to what have you found works well when you're thinking about maintaining a personal touch while putting and making that automation much more powerful with personalization through good data practices or the right data practices? What would you say there?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And that's kind of the, sometimes the biggest hiccups when people try to start a digital motion, right? And there also are a lot of similarities with marketing, right? When you're running campaigns, you need clean data to know how to segment your customers. And I think really where it starts first is getting wrap your head around what's going on with your data. And I like to split it into two different buckets, where it's understanding where it's coming from, right? Is it being updated? Let me mute this. Is it being updated by a system, or is it actually being updated by a process, most likely like a person, right? Person meaning a sales rep, a customer success manager, whatever that might be. Start there, but it's actually not the start. That's step one. Step zero is actually understanding your use case and goal. Then you can kind of start to do your essentially an audit, understanding where that data is coming from, how is it being updated, at what frequency. Now, going back to the personalization standpoint, there's a couple of ways in which you could do that, right? It's based on the segmentation of who you're reaching out to in whatever that motion is. You can take it a step further, and I have some pretty good examples of this, where you could bring in your dynamic content in, if you're using email, which is, in a lot of cases where people go when they're thinking of digital CS and, tech touch motions, you could bring in content through, you name it, most likely your CRM or your CSP that is relevant to the customer baked into an email. A good example of this, especially from a customer success manager, maybe they're negotiating a renewal or the customer asks for client details. If you're using tools like a snippet or canned response that's connected to your CRM, some tools like that have that capability, like SalesLoft, HubSpot. You can bring in that dynamic content about the customer directly into your inbox if there's like a browser extension. So again, that's a scalable way of bringing in the dynamic content to the customer. Same thing could be applied in your marketing if you're using marketing like automation technology, which you definitely can. I think a lot of people kind of keep it separate, thinking that they need customer success platforms or sales engagement platforms to do it. There's a lot of tools in your tech stack that could do the work. But you could bring in that content just the same to personalize it. But as far as cleaning it, that's definitely one of the first steps. But I would start small, focus on the goal, understand your data. And it's sometimes as simple as just running a report. Are there missing values? Are the values consistent? Date fields are also your best friend too. You could get a pretty good understanding of what should be happening in an account lifecycle just based on your high touch accounts. You start from beginning to end, contract start to contract end, and then kind of work backwards from there to even do some simple touch points.
Okay, so you mentioned something that I think I tend to think when I hear the term digital scale or digital touch or tech touch or whatever the term is that people want to use today. Yeah. You mentioned something that I think is really true. A lot of times I hear the idea that it means that instead of hopping on the phone, I'm sending you emails, right? Yeah. And I'm probably going to send you blasts of mass emails that are scheduled at certain times rather than me doing it one by one by one by one. Right. So, but, and you mentioned that a huge portion of this is that you're going to have to be able to communicate back and forth with the customer without getting on the phone with them.
Yes.
But you also seem to imply that it's more than that. So yes. What else beyond just sending emails do I need to be thinking about if I want to start moving into this more of a digital scale motion?
Yeah, I think this is where it becomes now a cross-functional effort. Right. So it depends on your organization. I've seen some great examples of where now support needs to be brought into the mix as well. When I say support, right, how are they communicating with customers? Are they pushing the right content, within their knowledge base? Is there a knowledge base, right? That's something maybe you either work with content marketing on or, product marketing, so on and so forth. Whoever owns that, sometimes it could be customer success enablement, right? Having that available to the customer is all digital CS. That's going to be hosted in, an LMS, or whether it's just simple documentation, whatever that might be. That's all digital because you're going to be able to scale it, leverage it to customers in whether it's communication, proactive communication, or reactive communication. Reactive most likely in the support side, or if a question comes in. Also, too, I've started to see a shift in the space as well of chatbots. I've implemented one at a company, and it actually, again, this is more so on the support side, right? Because that's typically where inquiries go, where product issues, bugs, maybe a receipt, things of that nature. But again, it still goes down to the customer experience and being able to serve, or really automatically serve for it to be self-serve for the customer, to find the information that they need to do it in a scalable way, especially if you're managing tons of customers, especially a freemium product. So that's something to keep in mind. And those are some of the core pieces. Digital could also be viewed as if you're hosting, again, one-to-many, if you're hosting larger webinars, an academy. So those are all parts of digital motion, but they're also a great example of how those will help if you have this broken out in your business, like if it's a tech touch segment or long tail and then your high touch, it'll help all your customers. So if you're investing it for, that segment that's not supported, inevitably it's going to help others too. And yeah, those are just a couple examples, but
Yeah, I think at least the thing that jumps out to me as you say that is that a lot of times that I love that you started with the idea of cross functionality, and that is that so often there are these different components that exist in a silo. They exist independent. They don't that the academy is on the side. It's like something that a user can go to if they want to. But in this case, it's like, well, if I'm not going to be on the phone training you for 2 hours a month, as a CSM, then there has to be a way that I'm encouraging you to do that. And it has to feel like it's part of the process. And so I think that's a really critical piece of, like, you might have a lot of these different disparate services or capabilities you've added to your company, but you have to tie it in together to something that feels cohesive and natural.
100%. Yeah. And I think it goes back to also like the data component too, right? At the end of the day, we talk about scale, right? Like they're not getting on the phone to train every single customer, thousands and thousands of users. But now, it goes back to, Debra, what you brought up, having the information in your CRM or better yet, your data warehouse, then you could disseminate it in tons of different places. But like, did they complete said academy? Did they complete that training? Having that is so powerful, because then you can now, if they haven't, right, maybe you want to segment it further where it's like, hey, here we've identified people with X title should be 100%. Maybe they're an ops person. They have to finish the academy. I'm going to focus on them and check in with them to make sure they complete it. How do you do that though? You need the data, and that's kind of where it starts. Mm-hmm. But once you do that investment, again, it could help with bigger customers just the same.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, so much to dig in here. I'm curious to know, in your experience, I guess a little bit of a two-part question.
Sure.
What in your experience is the right time to start thinking about tech touch for your organization? Is there a certain customer volume? Is there a certain kind of set of customer sizes, or are there certain signals or triggers that might indicate now's the time? And then how do you approach what recommendations would you have for maybe a CS leader in making that recommendation and trying to rally maybe around that idea? I think sometimes we encounter just innate in the human experience, aversion to change, resistance to the idea of automation, even when maybe we believe that it may be more efficient. A fear of stepping away from total ownership of the outcome can be scary, right? Especially when maybe your comp structure is tied up in that. So I know that that's a lot to pack into one question. Maybe take us through it in the way that makes the most sense to you to consider those pieces.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, to kind of go to the first point, I'll try to make sure I get every point here because they're great questions. I think it's less about thinking about tech touch or a digital motion and more so about like, hey, how do I just manage my customers at scale or know the most about my customers? And really where that stems from, in my opinion, like this is where I advise customers, I'd say start thinking about it like immediately. I do it now. I'm a pretty fresh consultancy, about a year and a half in the space now. And I heavily like modifying my CRM, trying to see if I could get a data warehouse. That's the core of it. So if you start to think, all right, hey, how do I segment my users? Who are my customers? How do I identify who my customers actually are? How do I identify if they have access or not? And then also, I think the biggest thing is making sure that there aren't data silos. Get everything connected, because that's going to empower you when you are ready. I mean, ready's relative to that organization, right? Because a couple things could come up, right? Hey, how much budget do I have for X amount of CSMs, right? Do I just have one and I'm focusing on acquisition and I have 5 sales reps? We're talking very small startup, maybe. And then maybe we're doing really well and we want to, manage those customers at scale, get the right touch points out. But it really starts with the data infrastructure first, less about tech touch and or digital CS. Now, as far as going to, I think the other question was about customer success leaders, VPs of CS, when they're trying to get buy-in, right? Or trying to build a case. I think the biggest thing is I see a couple of traps too. I see a lot of association where if I'm doing digital CS or tech touch, I need tools, right? And that might be the case. Maybe they're a very scrappy organization. They don't have anything, but odds are when they're starting to think in that way, there are tools in their tech stack that can already do it to build that case. We, did it at my prior organizations. We already use, I think I mentioned it earlier, some marketing automation technology that we were already using for content marketing, as well as sales engagement platforms. And you could kind of build a case in that way, in terms of, if you do need the technical investment. As far as the focus on the strategy and buy-in, it will come down to the, where was I going with this? Hold on, I got to think about it for a second. The technical investment, we're talking about
getting the tools in place, making the case for the investment in the software, and then maybe we were starting to, I think, talk about the idea of like buy into this idea of
yes,
this scaled approach, right?
yes, and then that was where I was going with this. Thank you for bringing it back. It's the what's working currently. So taking a step back and looking at process and seeing what's going on with my high touch customers that actually works, or a gut check, right? That's always a debatable thing when, you're looking at especially strategies that are more qualitative as opposed to quantitative. But at any rate, identify what processes you want to keep and that you are confident in. And it's like, okay, how do I do this at scale? Or better yet, what's taking a lot of my customer success manager or account manager's time? And I feel like we could take them off of it. It's very repetitive. And that way we could have them focus on more impactful opportunities that we can't automate. And I think that's twofold, right? It could be, hey, onboarding messaging, such a simple thing that some companies still to this day do not automate and send out, right? Whether it's coming from content marketing, or maybe it should be looking like it's coming from customer success manager or onboarding rep or implementation specialist. That would give time back if it's again, that's one person that's focusing on that, to go focus on building relationships, being multi-threaded, focusing on the renewal and negotiations there, building QBRs. On the flip side too, again, going back to use cases, maybe QBRs are, quarterly business reviews take a lot of time for, the team. There are solutions out there. I think there's one out there, Matic, where it connects to your data warehouse, brings in dynamic content into a slide deck, PDF, you name it. And that way you could automate that piece of it, gives time back. Maybe there's a very, high touch implementation that's involved and you can't automate it. So to kind of, and it was a bit of a tangent, and I have a habit of that. But
It was a packed question, to be fair.
What's that? No, it's all good.
It's a complex question. Joe, one of the things I like to do is I call it the Todd bot. It's my attempt to, if I were an AI and I was to try to summarize everything you just said, I'd like, what would my Todd bot response to all that be? And I would say, it sounds like the first thing is, when it comes to, are you ready? I think a lot of people would say, well, I'm ready when I have enough volume of customers to where it's painful. But your response was different, which, I mean, maybe that's part of it. But I really like that your response was when you have the data infrastructure to support it. That's what's important. It's not about, because just because your customers are small or because you have a lot of them doesn't mean you're ready to do this. If you're not capturing data in the right places and you can tie it all together, you're not ready. So the infrastructure is paramount. So that was kind of the first thing. And then when it comes to actually driving the change, you need to be able to demonstrate that you know what works already. And then you're just figuring out how to make that into a digital piece. So if you're trying to convince leadership to change, you need to be able to show that you know what works already. And I would guess a lot of people don't even know what works, right? Sure. They're just doing stuff. They're throwing stuff at the wall and they're seeing what sticks. And if it's like, if you can go in and you say, I know this is really critical, but it's repetitive and we could automate it. Now all of a sudden you have a case you can make that's going to help people feel more comfortable. So that's my Todd bot summary. What do you think? Did I do an okay job?
Solid. I think that was great, in all honesty.
It feels a lot like you're suggesting an MVP model. Let's get a minimum viable product or solution process here. Let's isolate a use case that we are confident will work well. Let's use the tools we already have.
Yes.
Let's let's work on having that data in place so we can run these tests, and then let's iterate and grow. And I love that. It does sound to me like that skill set may not be a standard fare CSM or implementation manager who's kind of pulling those pieces together, or maybe of course has a propensity to develop that skill set, but maybe not may not have come with that. Who fills that role? Who takes the lead on that? What skill set do they need to succeed in taking the lead?
It's a very good question. How I would break this down is it's definitely like revenue. It's an operations role. It's definitely either someone that might be in RevOps currently, and or customer success operations. But let's say those don't exist at the moment. Typically, you're going to want to find what's called like an operations generalist, like they're already doing op-esque, stuff and responsibilities, kind of like going back to what I was doing. I was using technology, data to make my life easier. Try to go in your organization and find that individual, right? You might want to go contact, if you have a couple different tools. Hey, who's my power user of X tool? Have the vendor tell you. Great. I need to talk to Johnny or, Sarah or whoever, because I need to understand, one, what are they doing with that tool, and like to help, make their day a hell of a lot easier. And then also too, like, are they willing to kind of, potentially take this on or make a shift? But I would say focusing on, at least for the digital tech touch motion, try to find someone that's already potentially has that skill set or the drive to learn the technology or to scale, and then kind of focus on that. But it's definitely going to be someone in RevOps. Also too, something to keep in mind, which we talked about earlier on data infrastructure, that's not going to be, it depends. It's not going to really be ops. It's going to be a blend of ops, but most likely an engineer, so someone potentially on the product side who's going to need to, essentially eliminate any data silos, right? Like obviously in most cases, hopefully you have a data warehouse, especially if you're a SaaS solution, but you might not have your CRM data, your data from your marketing solution, sales solution, whatever that might be, in one data warehouse. So that way you could feed it back out or transform it. So that's, and a lot of times either an operations analyst to transform the data, and then more so an engineer to connect everything. But don't get, too afraid, right? Like, I think that's a lot of people are like, oh, how am I going to do this? It's more headcount and so on. You still can start small, focus on the data that you have in front of you. I'm a big believer in using your CRM. Don't use spreadsheets, but if you need to just quickly just understand the data, export it into a Google Sheet or a spreadsheet just to understand it, and maybe just do some small imports just to test out how automation works. Also helps to build that case, right? Like, hey, I need to track how much time now this is taking me to do it manually. If I had the engineer, right, maybe it's just internal buy-in, right? You might have them sell to them, hey, I would save X amount of hours, which would cost X based on my time, and I could focus elsewhere, and so on.
Okay, Joe. So I wanna switch topics just a smidge now, because
Sure.
the one of the things that I think this is SaaS therapy, right? So one of the things I really like to do is like let's just get into the ick a little bit. Let's just dive right in. And you've now been at a couple of different companies leading CS, both in automation and leading larger teams. Now you're consulting people. What are some things that you've seen? What are some mistakes or problems that people have done that are going to like help us identify the pitfalls? What are, and feel free that you don't have to throw any specific.
Get as specific as you
Yeah,
want.
get as specific as you want. Tell us their
We're here
names.
for it.
Yeah, no, exactly. But we want to know, like, what are some of the things you've seen that are bad examples that we should avoid?
Oof, I got stories. I mean, I've even had my own. I was on a different session, and I could tell you one thing is just understanding your data. I always tell this story because it's a good benchmark, because we're all at fault. I think with automation, especially, you need to understand that things can break. There's always things at risk, especially when you're just relying on the machine. I was at an organization one time, inviting someone to register, or whole company to register for access and set up a training, and I accidentally emailed the CEO's wife. So that's like even something on my side, that is a great example of just understanding your data, right? Also, a good way to avoid that as a tip, like, hey, if you're doing some sort of list, and I'm sure maybe on the marketing side, this goes the same, make sure your own company's domain is not in there, or maybe just not unpaid domains, whatever that might be. I think also to that point is another tip is just, who do you not want to fall into automation? That's kind of like the summary there. Rather than focusing on who do you want in, focus on who do you not want to go in first, and then you could avoid any sort of issues and pitfalls later. As far as other examples, you'd be shocked on how many companies I've worked with, whether that's full-time or whether that's consulting, that just don't know their customers. And that's a huge issue, right? Whether they don't know if they're in their current contract, or even if they have product access. And that comes down to where, when we spoke about earlier, is setting up that data infrastructure and figuring out that first is so crucial, as opposed to just thinking scale, digital CS and tech touch. I mean, as far as other examples, I mean, I've seen the reluctancy of people not wanting to change. I think enablement is such a core part of doing this. Whether you're implementing, a customer success platform, a CRM, obviously in most cases, I think a lot of the companies that we're working with have them already, but that risk of, just not wanting to change has to start from leadership. And sometimes they don't put that in first, like, hey, this is what we're using, this is how it's going to help you. And where that becomes a challenge is not only for vendors, but also for ops folks, right, that are implementing said solutions. That could be a huge challenge, right? Obviously, they could work with leadership to enable the users, make sure that they're selling the value, but it does start from the top. And then, in addition to that, I've seen this when working. I do a lot of like implementations. I'm definitely more on the ops and tech side of things, and it goes back to the concept of like, hey, I need a technology to solve this problem, but in reality, they don't have the processes built out. So like, they don't know like what works. So they're just, again, when we talk about throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks, I've seen companies do the reverse. They're like, all right, I just spent $50,000 or $100,000 on you name said tool. And then they're like, hey, well, let's try this new strategy. And then it's this concept of like, well, does the strategy even work? Now we implement it, spent tons of resource hours, and trying to implement something that we don't even know that works, as opposed to focusing on something that does, and then doing the reverse. I would say those are some of the top key things. But every company, though, I want to make it clear, has data problems. Every single one, no matter how clean they think their data is or how messy. It's just a matter of starting, from the use case, understanding what you're trying to solve for first, and then piece it all together. But if you could get ahead of it as a startup, focusing on it, odds are you're going to scale at some point. You're going to need a digital CS or tech touch, motion. Focus on the data infrastructure. It will help even high touch, mid touch, enterprise, you name it. Yeah, those are some of the examples and horror stories.
So did the CEO's wife register?
You know what? I don't know. I was more shocked than anything else. I was like, I'm just not going to tell this for a couple of years. It's like, when you tell your parents
we're getting we're getting the secret exposed here.
Yeah. Oh, it's exposed now, but no, but it was, it was very early in my career. We're talking 10 years ago. And I don't even think it was like any major solution. I was using personally, was like a Outlook plugin, and still in the process of trying to learn how to use it. It accidentally sent it to like a contact list or whatever, stopped it, but it was too late. So, that's how it goes. But and it also goes to understanding your technology too, making sure you understand how it works, focusing on a little test segment. That's key, but.
One of the things that jumps out at me though, and I'm struggling with this. So help me think through this, Joe, because
sure.
The challenge that I'm hearing here to do this really well, especially if it's being driven by kind of one champion inside of an organization that says like, let's mature our approach here. Let's get better at this. There's like a business analyst and a data mindset There's somebody who needs to understand infrastructure and technology and how these things can talk to each other. But then you also have to be like a marketer and be able to think through copy and how you're going to communicate. But at the same time, you don't want to lose the personal touch that you get from being a relationship manager. And like that just sounds like we're taking the capabilities of 4, maybe 5 different people inside of an organization who all have very unique skill sets. And then we're trying to figure out how to create an experience that replicates that. How do you do that with one person in an organization who probably could be really good at 1 or 2 of those things, but probably not all of those things?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, and I think it comes down to starting small first. It kind of goes in building that business case, right? If you could prove, how the incremental, steps that you've taken, right, is driving value to that customer, renewing customers, saving that time. And when I say those small steps, right, we're talking about data warehouse, right? Let's take that off the table for a minute, right? Let's say you have some data in Salesforce, right, or HubSpot, you name your CRM, and you might need to do a little auditing on your own, right? You might have to kind of break down a spreadsheet, ask questions. I've done this personally in a number of organizations where it's like I'm talking to 5, 6 different people to figure out, are they a customer? When did they not receive access? I was even doing some new business stuff too, like not receive that. I mean, when did their access end to try to bring them back on? Whatever that might be. So there might be some manual cleanup first. Now, as far as tools go, there are even some tools that are out there that have freemium models for like sequencing, such as maybe it's Apollo.io, great solution as well. I use it personally, not sponsored in any way. It's just like, hey, it's something that's a low hanging fruit for someone to just, if they have a very scrappy organization. But you do a little bit of that cleanup and work on your own, kind of have to be scrappy, and then prove that case. Like, hey, look what I was able to do once I got the data clean. That initial lift is, it's a bit of a pain, but then it's all right. Well, in a perfect world, if it was all clean, if it was updated, appropriate, look how much time this took me if it just is all synced. So I'd say start with some, simple solutions, smaller segments. Try to also be aligned on what the goal is, right? I think I brought up, renewal, maybe it's NRR, GRR, maybe it's actually just like time to value, like when are they officially out of onboarding? That might be something to keep in mind too. There are also some other solutions for like documentation, right? So Tango. I think it was, now it's actually called Tango.ai. It was Tango.us. I don't know when they made that shift recently. Again, not sponsored or anything like that, but I've used it personally to track documentation creation. So if you have that plugin on your Google Chrome, Google Chrome extension, and you track your steps in, you name your SaaS platform, it'll spit out like, hey, track all the steps of what you've taken, and then you could add additional descriptions to it. I think even now it's taken it a step further and does it for you. And then whether it's a Google Doc, whether it's a Notion doc, whatever it is to host it, you start to build your knowledge base. It takes time, of course, but you could start to help build that case by using some either, low cost solutions, free solutions, in order to kind of, build out that case. But it's, of course, be aligned on the KPI first and what you're trying to solve. But bringing it back to like the other people, once you have that, then you could start to say, hey, well, now if I need to eliminate this data silo, start to ask for what that looks like. Obviously try to tie revenue to it as best as you can, right? Like revenue growth, expansion. If we're talking about digital CS and tech touch, what's the expansion opportunity for these accounts? What's the expansion opportunities of high touch accounts as well by giving that time back? You can take it a step further of just like, hey, if you already have this problem where you have a lot of reps focusing on a long tail customer book, hey, well, we could have 1 or 2 people manage it while the other reps focus on higher touch, bigger opportunity customers as well. And we just have 1 or 2 people. And that would definitely, please, finance or your CFO, which is a little bit of a different play. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of business case making, but try to see what you could do on your own first. Not saying that it's going to be easy, but it's better in the long run.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me do my best to try to summarize our conversation today because we've talked about a lot. So first thing is we're going to start backwards with kind of your last point, which is
sure,
start small. If you want to be an innovator, if you think this is something that's meaningful for your organization, you want to go tech touch, you need to start thinking, how do I make myself more scalable as an individual?
Yes.
And if I can make that case, now I can start thinking through the technology that I have. And then eventually you need to get to the point where you're thinking through, how do you go from digital just for your scale accounts that are not very big to figuring out how you can be digital first with everybody. One of the things that I tell a lot of our customers that we work with is that too often we start with humans and then we follow up with digital, when it probably should be the reverse, even if it's high touch. Because if you start with digital, you're now telling and helping the customer understand that there's an expectation for them to take ownership of the solution. When you lead with a human, they always assume that the human is responsible for their success, but shouldn't be the case. So I think there's a case to be made that regardless of whether you want to do who you want to focus on, there's an opportunity to do digital first, even if you're going to still stay with high touch. And so I think that's a really cool thing to think about too. Okay, we're bound out of time, Joe, and we like to always ask our guests as they leave one final question. I mentioned at the start, this is SaaS Therapy, right? So what's every good therapy session end with? It ends with a homework assignment. It ends with something that people should do, that they should go and apply. They should try to be better. If you could give our audience one homework assignment based off this conversation, what would you ask them to do?
That's a good question. I would say, honestly, get a good understanding of your data. If you get a good understanding of your data, that's where the opportunities lie, whether it's expansion opportunities, whether that's, increasing that time to value, whatever that might be. But having a good understanding of that data and leveraging it to your advantage is going to be key to any customer success manager and even sales related functions success.
Awesome. Great advice. Joe, thank you again for joining us today on SaaS Therapy. Debra, thanks for coming in. I like you more than Casey. Let's be honest. Like, it's great to have you around. Debra, any parting words?
Do I have it? I am so interested, Joe, in thinking about how I can actually consider some more scrupulous data management from a marketing perspective as well. And you've given me some good food for thought as I think about how product marketing, customer marketing can more cohesively plug in with the with tech touch, with customer success to create a much more personalized but also automated experience for customers in all the right ways. So really valuable conversation, learnings for me today, and excited about what you're building.
Awesome. No, it was great. It was great chatting with you both. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Joe. If people want to get a hold of you, where do they go? Just find you on LinkedIn, Joe Does Tech Touch, or where else can people find you?
Yeah, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. JoeDoesTechTouch.com is my site. Also have a newsletter there, so you'll be able to, get some learnings, on hopefully a weekly basis. I'll keep up with the frequency, but otherwise, yeah, you can check me out there.
Awesome. Thanks again, Joe. And thanks everybody for joining us today, and get back to it. Thanks all. SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.